Hello everybody, it's Dr. Yu here. In this video I'm going to show you just how intense China's COVID protocols are for returning international travelers. All of what I'm about to show you was super eye-opening for me. I haven't been back to China for 3 years now, and as soon as I stepped into the airport, I could tell that a whole heck of a lot has changed. So I want to show you what it's like to leave the airplane, go through the airport, and of course, what quarantine in China is like. So I'm not saying it's good or bad, I just want to show you what my experiences were. I found that a lot of other YouTube videos of the China experience doesn't really show you what the airport experience was like, and also doesn't provide explanations of why things are the way they are in China. And in this video, I'm going to try to do that for you. The quarantine experience in China that I experienced also seems to be quite different from other portrayals of the China quarantine experience from earlier on in the pandemic. It really seems that China has gotten a lot more organized and a lot more streamlined when it comes to quarantining international air travelers. So before we begin, this is part 2 of a 4-part video series. The first video describes just why China's COVID protocols are causing sky-high airfares for people wanting to fly to China right now. The third video will describe my reactions as a doctor to the quarantine food that I was subject to during my 10 days in quarantine. And the fourth video will describe my experiences of China's COVID prevention measures embedded into Chinese life right now. But on to this video first, the airport experience. The first 4 hours or so between landing and getting to the quarantine hotel was basically a blur for me. Where I was allowed to take pictures, I did. Often there was no time to take either pictures or videos, and there were many areas where we simply couldn't take either photographs or videos, so I'm going to do my best to walk you through it. After we landed in Shanghai, nobody was allowed off the plane right away. We were given instructions to actually remain in our seats until the Chinese customs official had come by and checked the plane. I wasn't exactly sure what they were checking. I had expected a hazmat suit people coming in, checking people's temperatures, checking their travel documents. But what actually happened was one customs agent, yes, dressed up in a hazmat suit, walked all the way up and all the way down throughout the plane, and that was it. Then we were good to leave, and they let us disembark the plane in small groups. So we weren't all allowed to get off the plane at once, but it was rows 1 to 20, and then 21 to 40, and so on and so forth. Fortunately, we were sitting close to the front of the economy class, so we got off fairly quickly. Right after entering the terminal building, I saw the difference between pre-COVID China and post-COVID China right away. Reminders of COVID's existence was everywhere. And this was the summer of 2022, when basically most of the Western world had already forgotten about COVID, or are trying to. Typically, there's a long passageway to the customs area that was previously wide open for passengers to walk through, but this has been fenced off, creating designated passageways so that all passengers could essentially be funneled through the airport in precisely the locations that they need to go without getting lost in the process. There were QR code scanners everywhere, where people basically declare their health status via QR code. At customs, there was so much more paperwork than usual, starting with a completely redesigned China entry form. It used to be a short, half-a-page length yellow form, but now there's a lot more details to fill out. The form itself is blue instead of yellow. And when I got to the customs agent, there were a lot more questions about what I was doing and where I was going in China. Now, I didn't feel anything malevolent about any of this. It was just what was necessary for the authorities to make sure that they know where you are, and that if they need to quarantine you to prevent you from being a health hazard to the public, they can do so. We also had to sign a consent form to allow us to do COVID tests in the airport, and after that, the fenced-off passages let us outdoors for swabbing. This took a while. It was in very hot weather, but I thought this was very smart of the airport designers to do the COVID testing outside as opposed to inside, because as we know, COVID is airborne, and the better ventilation in an outdoor setting will make transmission of COVID far less likely than if the COVID testing was done indoors. Now, after the swabbing, only then were we allowed to get our bags. Now, I've never seen Pudong Airport in Shanghai this empty before. All this space built for so many more passengers now reserved for just a few of us. And since the process prior to retrieving our bags took so long, we didn't have to wait at all to get our bags. They are already waiting for us at the carousel. And after we collected our bags, the airport maze divided us travelers into 3 groups based on our final destinations. One section was for travelers whose final destination is Shanghai itself. The second section is for travelers who will end up in a province that's geographically adjacent to Shanghai, like Jiangsu or Zhejiang. The third section is for other travelers, like me, who are traveling further than an adjacent province. Different people have different quarantine hotels and different experiences based on where their final destinations are. And their quarantine experience also depends on where they choose to quarantine, whether it's Shanghai or some other city that they enter upon initially arriving in China. Before arriving in Shanghai, I've heard that Shanghai was notorious for being not so good a quarantine destination. So I was hoping for a decent hotel, but I wasn't getting my hopes up. The bus taking us away from the airport to our quarantine hotel didn't really help things. We just seemed to drive and drive and drive. In fact, we drove for over an hour. And after the hour mark, there was basically no hotel in sight. We're in a relatively less densely populated area, and we're beginning to wonder if there's been a mistake. But no, the bus finally stopped at what seemed to be a series of apartment blocks. And it turns out that this was our quarantine hotel. And these quarantine hotels were actually just public rental apartment buildings. And they seem to be custom built for quarantine purposes. This is why I say China seems to have gotten much more organized when it comes to quarantining international air travelers. Now, this one building aside, there was just blocks and blocks of these rental apartment buildings in the area where we were in. There must have been at least 20 or 30 buildings. Each of them were 7 stories high, and they even have a centralized medical waste dump. I'm guessing this is where the waste from all the people living in quarantine ends up. Of course, before they let any of us into the buildings, our bags had to be disinfected.
Wow, 就是这个
I'm not sure what was in the disinfectant, but it was really smelly. Seemed to resemble a combination of bleach and chlorine. Pretty sure it's not something you would want your bare hands to touch for long. Now, one of you, a person named Rick, had an insightful comment to my earlier video. That even married couples weren't allowed to quarantine together. They each had to pay for a separate quarantine room and quarantine separately, resulting, of course, in double the fee. I actually observed this. An old married couple in front of me got into quite the spat with the hazmat suits over this exact issue. I can certainly empathize with them, but I guess they have to fund the quarantine facility one way or another. In any case, thanks Rick for the insightful comment. For me, the hazmat suit led me to my isolation room, and of course there were many rules to follow, such as never leaving the room except to pop your head out to get your food or throw your garbage, and you always had to have your mask on at all times when you opened the door. COVID tests were done on days 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, and 9 of isolation, so basically every other day. And there were twice-a-day temperature checks, and these were all done by people in hazmat suits. I learned during quarantine that the locals call them the big whites, the 大白, and I can see why. When they're not wearing their COVID gowns, their hazmat suits are all white. And despite their reputation from some of the videos we've seen online, most of the big whites were very nice to me. Their nasal pokes were very gentle, and they were all very helpful, answering every question I had during my quarantine stay. Now, what else would be nice and helpful is if you like this video and subscribe to my channel to help other people find this video and find my channel so that they can also learn about the quarantine experience in China in case they want to travel anytime soon. Thanks so much. They also gave us these bags of N95 masks, which were really comfortable, as well as a bottle of disinfectant tablet, which we were officially instructed to put into the toilet to sterilize it. So I'll show you guys around my room now. This was filmed a few days after I started quarantine, so as you can see, my food processor and hot plate has already arrived. There was no microwave that they provided, although they did have a fridge, which is very handy. They have that door there going to presumably a different room, but that was always locked. The desk, as you can see, TV, and if you need anything like food or supplies, you can always get it shipped to you. That was how I ordered my food processor and hot plate, which was really useful. And that was really it. I'm not going to show you the washroom because it's very messy. Now you can see that these blocks of apartment buildings built presumably specifically for quarantine purposes just go on and on. And yes, there was a balcony there, but really, even if I wanted to go out there, I wouldn't have because the outdoor temperature was over 40 degrees during the day. And it's really better to just stay inside where there's air conditioning than to go outside at all. And you can see that there's a camera there that looks out onto our side of the building. I have heard stories of people having mental health breakdowns in quarantine, trying to jump off of their balconies, and so presumably that camera is there so that they can monitor people's safety and make sure people don't do anything they're not supposed to do. Then again, CCTV cameras are very frequently seen in all parts of China, even before COVID, so seeing this thing here wasn't necessarily something that surprised me. And just to be on the safe side, what the Chinese authorities have done is that they've actually locked all the windows and all the doors leading to these balconies. So unfortunately, I couldn't use these balconies, but I actually wouldn't have used it even if I wanted to, because it was just so hot outside. I have to be honest, my days in quarantine, like many other YouTubers, were not very eventful. Basically, it consisted of just waiting for each meal, watching programs on Chinese television, getting some work done, and doing a lot of COVID-related paperwork. There was lots of coordination with the authorities in Shanghai, with authorities in my final destination, and basically planning my departure. So in June, China changed their quarantine policy from 21 days to 7 plus 3 days for a total of 10 days now. And at the end of 7 days, it is possible to leave centralized quarantine and spend the rest of the 3 days at home in home quarantine, which is much more comfortable. That is, if the local and destination authorities let you. If they do, and you only need to quarantine centrally for 7 days, then as my viewer Rick alluded to in his comment, yes, they would provide an escort to take you from where you isolate centrally to your home. Of course, this is probably to make sure that you don't give them the slip during the transportation process. I tried to leave after 7 days and I ended up not being able to. Turned out that Shanghai would only release me if my destination gave them a written statement saying that they would be responsible for my COVID test status. But of course, because Shanghai went through that horrible months-long lockdown experience, any destination in China, especially my destination city that has not yet had any positive cases of COVID thus far in this almost 2.5 years of COVID, that city did not want to take responsibility in case Shanghai messed up. And so they did not want to give me that statement, letting me go after 7 days. And so I had to quarantine centrally in Shanghai for 10 days. But since my quarantine was for 10 days, which is the full length of quarantine, after quarantine there's no such escort because I am essentially considered a free man. And now if you're curious about what type of food I had during my quarantine period, and about my perspectives on the food from a medical and health standpoint, stay tuned and check out this next video. See you there.